A poor little girl enters a restaurant with an empty plate and says to the billionaire, "Could you spare some food to take to my sick grandmother?" What he does next is unbelievable. The rain was falling mercilessly when Richard Bennett parked his black Audi in front of Le Petit. Just like every Tuesday, promptly at 2 in the afternoon, he entered the elegant restaurant, his weekly escape from the boardroom. "Good afternoon, Mr. Bennett," the maitre d' greeted him with a professional smile. "The usual table." Richard just nodded. At 42, he had built a real estate empire and a reputation as a cold, calculating man. Words onto him were resources to be conserved, just like any other asset on his financial statements. He walked through the nearly empty dining room, his Italian shoes echoing on the marble floor. The waiter pulled out the chair by the window, from where he could watch the city while remaining isolated from it, exactly how he lived his life. "The menu today, sir?" "No." "The usual?" The waiter retreated with a discreet nod. Richard adjusted his shirt cuffs and watched the rain through the large window. People hurried along the sidewalks, protecting themselves as best they could, some with expensive umbrellas, others improvising with newspapers or plastic bags. They all seemed small and insignificant from where he sat. His filet mignon with a red wine reduction arrived, accompanied by grilled vegetables and a glass of sparkling water. He ate in silence, chewing each piece methodically, while his mind ran through numbers and strategies for the next day's board meeting. It was then that the restaurant door opened, bringing with it the sound of the rain and something completely unexpected. A small girl entered hesitantly. She couldn't have been more than 5 years old. She was soaked, her brown hair stuck to her thin face, her old dress clinging to her frail body. Her bare feet left little puddles on the immaculate floor. In her trembling hands, she held a white plate with a crack running from one side to the other. The maitre d' quickly approached, his expression shifting between shock and indignation. "Miss, you can't come in here like this. This is an establishment." "Let her be," Richard interrupted, surprising even himself. The maitre d' stopped mid-sentence, confused. The few other patrons present watched the unusual scene. The girl stood motionless, like a small animal ready to flee at the slightest sign of danger. "Come here," Richard called, making a gesture. She hesitated, looking at the door and then at him. Finally, she moved forward slowly, her steps silent, as if she had learned to move without being noticed. She stopped at a safe distance, her large brown eyes watching him with a mixture of fear and hope. She clutched the cracked plate to her chest as if it were a shield. "What do you want?" Richard asked, trying to soften the tone he used to command boardrooms. The girl took a deep breath, gathering her courage. When she spoke, her voice was small but clear. "Mister, can you put a little food here?" She held out the cracked plate with trembling hands. "It's for my grandma. She's sick." Those simple words hit Richard like a physical blow. Suddenly, he was no longer in the elegant restaurant, but in another place, another time. He was 6 years old, standing at the door of the master bedroom in the Bennett mansion. The housekeeper had told him not to bother his mother, but he had to see her. It had been 3 days since she had left her room. "Mommy!" he called, his childish voice seeming small in the immense room, darkened by heavy curtains. Eleanor Bennett was lying in the king-sized bed, looking fragile amidst the Egyptian cotton sheets. Her face, usually so vibrant, was as pale as wax. She turned her head slowly upon hearing her son's voice. "Richard, dear," she whispered with a faint smile, "you shouldn't be in here. Mommy needs to rest." "I brought you soup," he said, holding up a bowl with his small hands. "I made it myself." It wasn't true. The cook had made the soup, but he had insisted on bringing it to his mother, even when the housekeeper said it wasn't appropriate. Eleanor tried to sit up, but a wave of coughing stopped her. Richard stood there, holding the bowl, feeling helpless and scared. "Leave it on the table, my love," she said, when the coughing subsided. "Mommy will eat it later, I promise." But he knew she wouldn't eat it, just as he knew the doctors who visited the mansion with increasing frequency weren't making her any better. Richard blinked, returning to the present. The little girl was still there, looking at him with those big, sad eyes that seemed to carry the weight of the world. "Is your grandmother very sick?" he asked, his voice coming out softer than he intended. The girl nodded. She's had a fever since yesterday. She can't get up to make food, and I don't know how to cook very well. Richard looked at his barely touched plate, then at the girl. There was something about her, a dignity, a courage that defied her circumstances, that moved him deeply. Jean, he called to the maitre d', prepare 2 full meals to go. Soup, main course and dessert. Pack it all well. And mineral water too. The maitre d' nodded, trying to hide his surprise. Immediately, sir. The girl looked at Richard as if he had just performed a miracle. What's your name? He asked, gesturing to the chair across from him. She didn't accept the invitation to sit, remaining firmly where she stood, her bare feet forming a small puddle on the floor. Hannah, she replied, almost in a whisper. Hannah, he repeated. I'm Richard. He didn't mention his last name or his position. To this child, titles and fortunes meant nothing. What mattered was whether or not he could help her sick grandmother. Do you live far from here, Hannah? She shook her head. It's past the big stores, in those streets with the old houses. Richard knew the area, an old neighborhood on the outskirts, where houses that had once seen better days were now crammed together on narrow streets, a place he would normally only see through the window of his car, if he ever drove through there at all. Another memory surfaced. His father, Alexander Bennett, standing by Eleanor's bed, arguing with a doctor in a low voice, believing Richard couldn't hear them from the hallway. There's nothing more we can do here, the doctor was saying. She'd be better off in a hospital with the proper equipment. My wife will not spend her final days in a hospital, Alexander replied, with the cold voice Richard would later inherit. Bring the equipment here. Money is not an issue. Mr. Bennett, it's not a matter of money. Your son needs to be prepared for... My son will be prepared when and how I decide. Richard silently backed away, returning to his room filled with toys that never filled the growing emptiness inside him. The waiter returned with 2 white bags, carefully packed with the restaurant's golden logo. The meals are ready, Mr. Bennett, he announced, placing them on the table. Richard took out his wallet and left several bills, far more than the cost of the meal. Bring my coat and umbrella, please. The maitre d' looked confused. Are you leaving already, sir? But you haven't finished your meal. I have another engagement now, Richard replied, standing up and buttoning his jacket. Hannah watched everything in silence, still clutching the cracked plate. When the waiter brought the black coat and umbrella, Richard took the food bags and looked at the girl. I'll walk you home, he said with a decisiveness that he himself didn't fully understand. The maitre d's eyes widened. Mr. Bennett, I can call a cab for the girl. Or perhaps one of our staff members could. That won't be necessary, Richard interrupted. I'm going myself. He couldn't explain why he felt this need. Maybe because when his own mother was dying, surrounded by luxury and private doctors, he had still felt completely alone and helpless. Or maybe because, for the first time in years, something had pierced the armor of indifference he had built around himself. Hannah looked at him with an expression of surprise and, perhaps, a touch of hope. Are you ready? Richard asked. She nodded, still holding the plate. We can leave that here, he suggested, pointing to the cracked plate. I know, Hannah replied with surprising firmness. It's Grandma's. She really likes it, even though it's broken. Richard didn't insist. There was a lesson there that he couldn't quite name. They went out into the rain, Richard opening the large black umbrella to shield them both. He offered his free hand to Hannah, who, after a moment's hesitation, took it. Her hand was small and cold in his, her thin fingers gripping with surprising strength. They walked in silence through the busy downtown streets, drawing curious glances, the tall man in the impeccable suit and expensive coat, holding hands with a barefoot, drenched little girl. Richard ignored them completely. His entire adult life, he had specialized in not caring what other people thought. As they walked, the scenery changed. The elegant storefronts gave way to small local shops. The mirrored skyscrapers were replaced by older, more modest buildings. The sidewalks became narrower and less maintained, with weeds growing through the cracks. Hannah led him with the confidence of someone who knew every stone in the path. They turned onto a side street, and then another, even narrower one. Here, Old houses were squeezed together, with faded facades and windows protected by rusty bars. Clotheslines crisscrossed from one side to the other, with drenched clothes hanging heavily. Richard remembered the day he found out his mother was never coming back. There was no formal announcement. His father never sat down with him to explain. Simply, one day, the medical staff was gone. His mother's room was empty. The sheets changed, as if she had never been there. "Where's Mommy?" he asked the housekeeper, who avoided his gaze. "Your father wants to see you in his study," was the only reply. In the immense mahogany and leather study, Alexander Bennett didn't stand up when his son entered. He continued signing documents, as if his wife's death were just another item on his agenda. "You start at a new school on Monday," he announced, finally looking at his son. "Boarding school. It's time for you to learn to be a man." There was no mention of his mother, no comfort, no tears, at least not in front of Richard. "It's this way," Hannah said, pulling him into an even narrower alley. Richard watched the girl walking ahead of him now, guiding him through a world he was completely unfamiliar with. She moved with determination, dodging the larger puddles, protecting the cracked plate as if it were a treasure. "Do you take care of your grandmother by yourself?" he asked, surprised by his own interest. Hannah looked back without stopping. "Now I do. Aunt Lisa used to come only, but she moved away. And your parents?" The girl slowed her pace, her small shoulders tensing up. "They went to heaven when I was a baby," she answered simply. "Grandma says they're stars now and watch over me." Richard felt something tighten in his chest. An orphan, just like him. But he had his father's fortune, the best schools, endless opportunities. Even if they were wrapped in emotional coldness, this girl had only a sick grandmother and a cracked plate. "We're here," Hannah announced, stopping in front of a small house with peeling walls and an iron gate hanging from a single hinge. Richard adjusted the bags in his arms. The rain continued to fall, lighter now, creating a soft mist that softened the harsh edges of the place. A practical voice inside him, the same one that had guided him through ruthless negotiations, told him to hand over the bags and leave, to return to his orderly, predictable world, to the numbers that always made sense, to the people who feared and respected him but never truly knew him. But another voice, one he hadn't heard in decades, insisted that there was something important here, something that could perhaps fill a void that all his money and power could not touch. "I'm coming in with you," he said, surprising himself once again that afternoon. Hannah looked at him curiously, her head tilted slightly to one side. "Why are you helping me?" she asked. With the direct frankness of children, Richard didn't have a ready answer. In his world of meetings and contracts, all questions had prepared answers. But here, in front of this 5-year-old child, he felt disarmed. "My mother got sick once too," he said finally. "I was a little older than you." Hannah nodded as if that explained everything. And maybe it did. "Grandma's going to like you," she declared with conviction. "She always says she can see people's hearts." Richard didn't reply. He wasn't sure he would like what Hannah's grandmother would see if she looked at his heart, or what he himself would find if he had the courage to look deeply. Hannah pushed the rusty gate, which opened with a creak. A small path of uneven stones led to the front door. To the side, a few hardy plants grew in recycled cans, a modest attempt to bring life to the place. As he followed the girl down the narrow path, Richard felt he was crossing more than just the physical distance between the restaurant and this humble house. He was crossing the invisible border he had built around himself, a border that had protected him from pain, but had also isolated him from everything that mattered. He didn't know what he would find inside that house, but he was sure of one thing: nothing in his life would be the same after this rainy day. Hannah pushed open the worn wooden door, which opened with a long groan. Richard hesitated for a moment before stepping inside, his eyes adjusting to the dim interior. The difference between the world outside and this small universe was as vast as the distance between his current life and the childhood he tried to forget. The first impact came from the smell, a thick mixture of mold, dampness, and something else, a medicinal scent of cheap, expired remedies. The faded yellow walls were stained with water leaks that drew maps of non-existent continents. On the ceiling, a single dim light bulb swung slightly, casting restless shadows in the corners of the room. "Grandma's in the bedroom," said Hannah, pointing to a half-open door on the other side of the small living room. Richard placed the food bags on a worn wooden table. He noticed that the space, despite its evident poverty, had an almost stubborn organization. The few pieces of furniture, a patched-up sofa, two mismatched chairs, a bookshelf with a few worn books, seemed carefully positioned. In one corner, children's drawings were taped to the wall, small, colorful worlds created by Hannah's hands. "She's going to like the food," the girl continued, placing the cracked plate on the table. "It's been a while since she's eaten properly." Richard felt a lump in his throat. He suddenly saw himself as that 6-year-old boy, trying to get his sick mother to eat, believing that soup could cure something that even the most expensive doctors couldn't reverse. He followed Hannah to the bedroom door, the sound of the rain on the roof creating a kind of melancholic background music. Before entering, the girl turned to him. "Grandma's been sleeping a lot. When she wakes up, sometimes she says strange things." Richard nodded, understanding the gravity between the lines of those simple words. The room was even smaller than the living room. A window with a makeshift curtain let in the grey light of the rainy afternoon. Under this dim light, he saw a frail figure lying on a narrow bed. The thin mattress was propped up on wooden crates, a makeshift solution that had become permanent. The woman seemed to almost disappear among the worn sheets. Her face, framed by grey, damp hair, was flushed with fever. Her breathing was shallow and rapid, her chest rising and falling with visible effort. A damp compress, which had already dried, lay next to the pillow. Hannah approached the bed and gently touched her grandmother's arm. "Grandma, I brought someone to help us, and there's good food." The woman didn't answer. Richard approached slowly, a strange feeling growing inside him. There was something familiar about that face consumed by illness, something that touched a distant, buried memory. Without thinking, he reached out and touched the woman's forehead. It was far too hot. The fever was high, likely over 102 degrees Fahrenheit. "How long has she been like this?" he asked, his voice tighter than he intended. Hannah hugged herself, suddenly seeming even smaller. "Since last night. She got up this morning, but then she fell." The girl's voice trembled. "She said it was just a cold, but I know it's not." Richard felt a chill run down his spine. The situation was serious. Anyone could see that. This wasn't a simple flu that would pass with tea and rest. At that moment, the woman moved. Her eyes opened slowly, unfocused from the fever. She blinked several times, trying to recognize the figures before her. "Hannah!" she called, her voice just a hoarse whisper. "I'm here, Grandma," the girl replied, holding the woman's bony hand. "I brought a man who helped us with food." The woman turned her face toward Richard, who was now standing by the bed. Her eyes, clouded by illness, tried to focus on him. There was a moment of confusion, then a spark of recognition that flashed through her gaze like distant lightning. "You," she murmured, blinking as if she couldn't believe what she was seeing. She raised a trembling hand toward his face. "You've grown. What are you doing here?" Richard felt the impact of those words like a physical blow. The world seemed to spin around him, the walls of the small room suddenly closing in. Long-buried memories exploded in his mind like fireworks. A younger woman, with brown hair tied in a simple bun, helping him fix the tie of his school uniform. "Don't worry, Richard. Your father will get used to the idea of you staying home." The same woman, sitting by his bed, reading him stories when the nightmares came. "So your mother would be so proud of the boy you are." Her in the mansion's kitchen, teaching him how to make cookies, laughing when he spilled flour on the floor. "Some messes are worth it, little one." And then, her crying silently as she packed a small suitcase. "Your father thinks it's best for you to go to boarding school now. I can't do anything." "Evelyn," Richard whispered, the name coming out like a prayer. Evelyn Carter, the housekeeper. The woman who had cared for him after his mother's death. The only person who had shown him genuine affection during those lonely years in the cold Bennett mansion. The woman his father had dismissed when he decided his son needed to toughen up away from motherly influences. Richard felt his heart break into 1,000 pieces. How had he not recognized her sooner? The years had transformed Evelyn, Illness and poverty had stolen the vitality from the woman who, in his childhood memories, had seemed invincible. "Little Richard," Evelyn whispered, a faint smile lighting up her feverish face. "I never thought I'd see you again." Hannah looked from one to the other, confused. "You know each other?" Richard couldn't answer immediately. A lump had formed in his throat, blocking the words. Evelyn coughed, a deep, rattling sound that shook her frail body. "So Evelyn took care of me when I was a child," he managed to say finally, "after my mother died." Understanding slowly dawned on Hannah's face. "So Grandma took care of you too?" Richard nodded, unable to elaborate. The cruel irony of the situation hit him with full force. Evelyn had cared for him in his most vulnerable moment, and now she was here, sick and poor, while he lived in luxury and comfort, having never once thought to look for her. Another wave of coughing shook Evelyn, stronger than the last. When it passed, she was left gasping, struggling for breath. Richard noticed with alarm that her lips had a slightly bluish tint. There was no time to lose. He pulled his phone from his pocket and dialed a number. "I need a private ambulance, immediately," he said, with the firm voice he used to give orders in his corporate empire. He gave the address and added, "It's an emergency. Patient with probable pneumonia, high fever, difficulty breathing. I want the best team available. Now." He hung up and turned his attention back to Evelyn. "We're taking you to the hospital. You're going to be okay." Evelyn tried to protest, but she had no strength. Hannah looked at Richard with wide eyes. "Hospitals cost money," the girl said, concern evident in her childish voice. "Don't worry about that," Richard replied, taking Evelyn's hand. He felt how cold it was, despite the fever. "I'll take care of everything." Evelyn squeezed his fingers weakly. "Hannah," she whispered. "My Hannah." "She's coming with us," Richard assured her. "You won't be separated." Something like relief passed through Evelyn's feverish eyes. She closed them, as if that brief conversation had exhausted her last bit of energy. The next few minutes passed in a blur. Richard helped Hannah pack a few clothes into a small, worn backpack. He asked her to change out of her wet dress into something dry. The girl obeyed silently, disappearing for a few minutes and returning in sweatpants and a t-shirt that was too big for her small frame. While they waited for the ambulance, Richard sat beside Evelyn's bed. Hannah fetched the empty plate from the table and returned to the room, standing quietly in a corner. "Is she going to get better?" the girl asked, her eyes fixed on her grandmother. Richard wanted to say yes, that everything would be fine. But there was something in Hannah's eyes that asked for honesty, not false promises. "We're going to do everything we can," he answered. "She's going to get the best care." The girl nodded, accepting that answer not as an evasion, but as a commitment. The ambulance arrived in less than 15 minutes, an impressive time considering the location and the labyrinth of narrow streets leading to the house. 2 paramedics entered efficiently, bringing modern equipment that looked alien in the simple room. One of the paramedics, a middle-aged man with kind eyes, quickly examined Evelyn. "She has a serious infection. She needs to be hospitalized," he confirmed, looking at Richard. "Low oxygen saturation, high fever, possible pneumonia. We'll stabilize her for transport." They began to work with precise movements. They placed an oxygen mask on Evelyn's face and started an IV line in her arm. Richard watched, feeling simultaneously powerful and powerless. Powerful for being able to provide this care, powerless in the face of human fragility. Hannah remained in a corner of the room, her wide eyes following the paramedics' every move. The empty plate was now held firmly in her small hands, as if it were an anchor in the storm that was turning her life upside down. As they began to transfer Evelyn to the gurney, Richard held her hand. The woman opened her eyes briefly, recognizing him through the haze of the fever. Don't worry," he said softly. "I'll take care of you both now." It was a promise, not just to Evelyn, but to himself. A promise that he would not again abandon the woman who had been a safe harbor in his childhood. A promise that, this time, he would be the one to stay, to care, to repay what he had received. As the team worked, preparing Evelyn for transport, Richard stayed by her side, holding her hand. A part of him, that scared 6-year-old boy, wanted to cry, to apologize, to explain why he had never looked for her. Another part, the man he had become, silently swore to do everything in his power to save the woman who had saved him so many times. "We're ready to transport," the paramedic announced, interrupting his thoughts. Richard gently let go of Evelyn's hand and went to Hannah, who was still watching everything with frightened eyes. "We're going with them," he said, holding out his hand to the girl. "Your grandmother is going to be fine." Hannah looked at his outstretched hand, then at Richard's face. There was caution in her eyes, the caution of a child who had learned too early that the world is not always kind. But there was also hope, the resilient hope that allows even the most hurt to keep believing. Slowly, she took Richard's hand with one of hers, while the other held tightly to the empty plate. Together, they followed the gurney carrying Evelyn to the ambulance. The rain had subsided to a fine drizzle. In the sky, between heavy clouds, a ray of sunlight tried to break through, shy, uncertain, but present, like the hope that was beginning to dawn in Richard's heart. He didn't know how, but somehow he would fix what was broken. Not just the plate Hannah held so carefully, but the lives that had now, by a strange twist of fate, become intertwined with his once more. St. Clair's Hospital took up an entire city block in an affluent part of the city. Its glass and concrete facade reflected the morning sun, creating a striking contrast with the still cloudy sky after days of rain. On the 5th floor, in a private suite overlooking the main park, Evelyn Carter breathed with the help of a thin oxygen tube. 3 days had passed since Richard found her. 72 hours of tests, diagnoses, and the start of intensive treatment. Severe bacterial pneumonia, complicated by malnutrition and chronic anemia, that was the doctor's diagnosis. Evelyn's frail body was fighting an infection that, had it gone untreated for a few more days, would likely have been fatal. Richard watched the scene through the half-open door of the room. In the hospital bed, Evelyn slept under the effect of light sedatives, her thin body almost disappearing among the white sheets. Beside the bed, in the armchair that the nurses had adjusted to be more comfortable, Hannah slept in an impossible position. Her small body was curled so that one hand could hold her grandmother's, even in her sleep. It was early, just after 7 in the morning. Richard had arrived before regular visiting hours, a privilege his name and generous donation to the hospital guaranteed. He carried a small paper bag. He entered the room silently and placed the bag on the side table. The sound made Hannah stir. Her eyes opened slowly, disoriented for a moment, until they focused on Richard. "Good morning," he said in a low voice. The girl straightened up in the armchair, rubbing her eyes with her free hand. The other remained firmly holding her grandmother's hand. "She's better today," Hannah said, looking at Evelyn. "She didn't cough as much last night." Richard nodded, impressed by the child's powers of observation. Even the nurses had commented on how attuned the granddaughter seemed to every small change in her grandmother's condition. "The doctors said the antibiotics are working," he confirmed. "Her fever is lower and her breathing is improving." Hannah nodded, as if she already knew this on her own. For 3 days, she had refused all attempts to get her away from her grandmother's room. She slept in the armchair, ate right there, and only left briefly to use the restroom. "I brought you something," Richard said, picking up the bag. "I thought you might be bored here." He took out a hardcover sketchbook, a box of professional colored pencils, and a small case with a sharpener and eraser. Hannah's eyes widened. "Are these for me?" she asked, her voice hesitant, as if she feared there had been some mistake. "Yes," Richard replied. "I thought you might like to draw while you wait for Evelyn to get better." Hannah gently let go of her grandmother's hand and approached the table. Her fingers touched the box of pencils with reverence. It was a complete collection of 36 different colors, the kind of art supplies that children her age usually only saw in expensive store windows. "I've never had so many pencils," she murmured, opening the box and looking at the perfectly organized colors. Richard felt a strange ache in his chest, a mixture of sadness and tenderness. That reaction said more about Hannah's life than any words could. A set of colored pencils, something so simple for most children, was an unimaginable treasure to her. "Joyce, I'll take very good care of them," the girl said, closing the box and stroking the cover of the sketchbook. "They're for you to use," Richard replied gently. "You don't have to save them. When they run out, We'll buy more." Hannah looked at him as if he had just said something incomprehensible. The idea of having more, of not needing to save every inch of a pencil, seemed like an alien concept to her. A nurse entered the room, breaking the moment. It was time for Evelyn's morning medications and to check her vital signs. With quiet efficiency, she adjusted the antibiotic drip, checked the temperature and pressure, and made notes on the chart. "She's responding well," the nurse said to Richard. "Dr. Morris will be by on his morning rounds around 10. Richard thanked her with a nod. The nurse looked at Hannah with a gentle smile. "Don't you want to rest a little in a real bed, dear? We have a room prepared for visitors at the end of the hall." Hannah shook her head, moving back closer to her grandmother. "So I want to stay with her," she replied simply, resuming her position in the armchair and taking Evelyn's hand again. The nurse exchanged a look with Richard, a look that held compassion and admiration for the child's dedication. "At least eat something decent," the nurse insisted. "I'll have them bring up a full breakfast." When the nurse left, Richard pulled up a chair and sat on the other side of the bed. The room was quiet, except for the rhythmic beep of the heart monitor and the soft hiss of the oxygen. "Hannah," he began, choosing his words carefully. "You know you can trust me, don't you? Evelyn, your grandmother was very important to me when I was a child." The girl watched him from across the hospital bed, her large eyes assessing him with a surprising intensity for someone so young. "Grandma never talked about you," she said finally. "She didn't." Richard felt a pang of disappointment, though he wasn't sure why. It was a very long time ago." "Why did you disappear?" Hannah asked directly, her childlike frankness dispensing with any subtlety. The question caught Richard off guard. How could he explain the complex dynamics of his privileged and emotionally sterile childhood to a 5-year-old? "My father sent me to boarding school," he replied, simplifying a much more complicated story. "After that, I went to college, started working, life went on." "But you didn't look for her," Hannah observed, a subtle accusation in her voice. Richard felt the weight of that simple truth. No, he had never looked for Evelyn. He had never thought about what had happened to the woman who had cared for him during the most vulnerable years of his childhood. "No," he admitted, "and I regret that now." Hannah seemed to accept that confession. She turned her attention back to Evelyn, gently adjusting the sheet over her. A nursing assistant brought a tray with breakfast: orange juice, toast, scrambled eggs, bacon, and a small bowl of fresh fruit. Hannah looked at the food with admiration, but didn't let go of her grandmother's hand. "You can eat," Richard said. "I'll hold her hand for you." After a moment of hesitation, Hannah accepted the trade. Richard gently took Evelyn's hand, surprised by how much the simple contact affected him. Memories of his childhood returned, Evelyn holding his hand as they crossed the street, Evelyn putting a bandage on his scraped knee, Evelyn wiping away his silent tears on the nights after his mother's death. Hannah ate slowly, savoring each bite as if it were a royal feast. Richard noticed she left half of each item on the plate. "Aren't you hungry for more?" he asked. "I'm saving it for lunch," she replied matter-of-factly. Richard felt a lump in his throat. Even here, in this luxury hospital, with all the abundance around her, Hannah's survival instincts remained active. "You don't need to save it," he said softly. "Oh, there will be more food for lunch, I promise." Hannah looked at him with a mixture of doubt and hope. After a moment, she picked up another piece of toast and continued eating. The hours passed slowly. Dr. Morris, a middle-aged man with graying hair and thin-rimmed glasses, made his visit. He examined Evelyn thoroughly and reviewed the latest test results. "We're on the right track," he concluded, speaking directly to Richard. "The infection is responding to the antibiotics, but she's very weak. The recovery will be slow." "How long?" Richard asked. "At least 2 weeks in the hospital. Then, rest at home for a few more weeks. She'll need a special diet to regain her weight and strength." Richard nodded. He was already organizing everything in his mind. A private nurse for when Evelyn was discharged, a nutritionist, maybe even a physical therapist. When the doctor left, Hannah picked up her sketchbook and the box of pencils. She sat back down in the armchair, propping the sketchbook on her knees. With almost reverential care, she chose a blue pencil and began to draw. Richard took a few work calls outside the room. When he returned, he found Hannah completely absorbed in her drawing. Her small fingers held the pencil with surprising firmness, and her brow was slightly furrowed in concentration. He approached quietly, curious to see what she was drawing. It was a house, not the small damp house where he'd found her, but a large, colorful one with wide windows, a red door, and a garden full of impossible flowers. In the sky, a bright yellow sun was smiling, and blue clouds floated like cotton candy. "It's beautiful," Richard commented. Hannah looked up, a little surprised by his presence. "It's my dream house," she explained, pointing to the details. "It has a big room for Grandma with a window to the garden, and a kitchen with a fridge that doesn't make noise." Richard smiled, touched by the simplicity of the girl's dreams. While other children her age dreamt of amusement parks and expensive toys, Hannah just wanted a house where her grandmother could live comfortably. She continued drawing, adding a tree next to the house. Richard watched her, fascinated by the care with which she chose each color, the concentration on her small face. There was a seriousness about her that 5-year-olds rarely possessed, a maturity forced by difficult circumstances. As he watched her, something strange was happening inside him. A feeling was growing, something he couldn't quite name but recognized as a kind of affection he had never experienced before. It was different from the attraction he felt for women, different from the admiration he had for competent colleagues, different even from the respect he had felt for his stern father. It was a protective feeling, but also one full of admiration, a desire to see this little person flourish, to develop her full potential. Suddenly, he realized he cared deeply about what happened to Hannah, not just because of Evelyn, but for the girl herself. Lunch arrived, and once again Hannah ate slowly, savoring every bite. Afterward, she returned to her drawing, now adding people in front of the house, 3 figures holding hands. "Who are they?" Richard asked. "Samisa, Grandma, and you," Hannah replied naturally, as if it were obvious. Richard felt something break inside him, a barrier he didn't even know existed. The fact that this child, who had known him for only 4 days, already included him in her vision of a family, touched him deeply. The afternoon progressed quietly. Evelyn woke briefly a few times, acknowledging Hannah with a faint smile before drifting back to sleep. The doctors assured them this sleep pattern was normal and beneficial for her recovery. Richard stepped out again to make a few more calls. When he returned, he found Hannah still drawing, now on a new page. This drawing showed what looked like a classroom, with several children sitting at desks. He approached quietly and sat in the chair next to her. Hannah continued drawing for a few minutes, adding details to the blackboard and the children's backpacks. Then, without looking up from the paper, she spoke in a voice so low that Richard had to lean in to hear, "I wanted to go to school, but Grandma can't afford it." The simple words hit him like a punch. Of course, Hannah didn't attend school. How could she, living in those conditions, with a sick grandmother and no resources? Suddenly, Richard remembered his own privileged education, the best private schools, personal tutors, an elite university. Everything he had taken for granted, while this bright child didn't even have access to basic education. "You're going to have everything you need," he said, with a conviction that surprised himself. "School, supplies, clothes, everything." Hannah looked up from her drawing, watching him with a mixture of hope and distrust. Her big eyes seemed to want to believe, but life had already taught her to doubt promises. "Really?" she asked, her voice still small. "Really," Richard confirmed. "I promise." For an instant, brief but unmistakable, a smile lit up Hannah's face. Not the restrained smile she sometimes showed, but a genuine smile that reached her eyes, completely transforming her face. It was like a ray of sun breaking through heavy clouds, revealing for a moment the child she was meant to be, joyful, confident, full of possibilities. As quickly as it came, the smile vanished, replaced by the serious expression that seemed to be her natural state. But Richard had seen enough. In that brief moment of pure joy, he had found a purpose that transcended real estate deals and bank accounts. As Hannah returned to her drawing, he made a silent promise not just to her or to Evelyn, but to himself. He would do everything in his power to see that smile again, to make it permanent. On the other side of the bed, Evelyn slept peacefully, her face now less marked by pain. The monitors showed stable vital signs, and the antibiotic dripped steadily through the intravenous tube. Outside the hospital window, the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. A new day was ending, the fourth since their lives had crossed on that rainy afternoon. One more day in the new routine that was establishing itself between them. A routine that, Richard was beginning to realize, was filling a void in his life that neither power nor money had ever been able to touch. A week had passed since Evelyn's admission. The hospital room, initially strange and sterile, now had touches that made it almost cozy. Hannah's drawings were taped to the wall next to the bed. A small vase of fresh daisies, which Richard brought daily, sat on the nightstand. The television remained almost always off. Hannah preferred the quiet to draw, and Evelyn still spent much of her time sleeping. But that morning, something had changed. Evelyn was sitting up in bed, propped against pillows, for the first time since she had arrived. Color was beginning to return to her face, and although she was still connected to the IV and oxygen, her gaze had a clarity it hadn't before. "Good morning," Richard said, entering the room with a new bouquet of flowers and a paper bag. Hannah was sitting in the armchair beside the bed, drawing as usual. Her eyes lit up when she saw the bag Richard was carrying. "I brought those pastries you liked yesterday," he said, placing the bag on the table. "And a special coffee for Evelyn, since the doctor approved it." Evelyn smiled faintly. "Thank you, Richard. You didn't have to go to the trouble." "It's no trouble at all," he replied, replacing the wilted flowers with the new ones. In the past few days, a routine had settled in among them. Richard would arrive early, before going to the office. He'd bring breakfast for Hannah and talk briefly with the doctors. He'd return at lunchtime when possible, and always in the late afternoon, often having dinner right there from the city's best restaurants. Hannah had relaxed a bit in his presence. She no longer watched him with that initial caution, though she still maintained a seriousness that seemed at odds with her 5 years. Evelyn, meanwhile, alternated between periods of lucidity and confusion. The infection was yielding to the antibiotics, but years of poor nutrition and inadequate medical care had taken their toll. "How's business?" Evelyn asked, as Richard adjusted the pillows to make her more comfortable. "Moving along," he answered vaguely. The truth was, he had barely paid attention to business in the last week. For the first time in his adult life, something more important occupied his thoughts. Evelyn seemed to want to say something else, but was interrupted by the nurse coming in for the morning procedures. Richard took the opportunity to step out of the room and make a few necessary calls. He had delegated many responsibilities to his directors, but there were still decisions only he could make. When he returned an hour later, he found Evelyn dozing again. Hannah was standing by the window, looking out at the city below. The 5th floor offered a privileged view of the Central Park and the buildings that stretched to the horizon. Richard approached quietly, stopping beside her. "It's so big," Hannah said, without looking away from the window. "The city." "It is," Richard agreed. "Have you ever seen it from this high up before?" Hannah shook her head. "I've never been in a place this high." "Our house is small." Richard observed the girl's profile. Her button nose, her brown hair that now clean and combed, revealed natural curls. In the past few days, he had provided new clothes for her, nothing extravagant, just simple, comfortable pieces that replaced the worn dresses and patched pants she'd brought in her small backpack. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, noticing her distant gaze. Hannah hesitated, as she always did before revealing something personal. It was a habit Richard had noticed, this pause, this moment of evaluation, as if she were calculating whether it was safe to share her thoughts. "Why are you helping us?" The question, direct and unexpected, caught Richard by surprise. He looked at Evelyn, still asleep, and then back out at the city below. How could he explain something he didn't fully understand himself? "Shall we sit?" he suggested, indicating the 2 seats by the window. Hannah nodded and followed him. They sat side by side, looking outside. The morning was clear, the sky an almost impossible blue after days of rain. Richard took a deep breath, resting his elbows on the windowsill. He had never been good at sharing personal feelings or memories. In the social and professional circles he frequented, that kind of vulnerability was seen as weakness. But something about this serious child made him want to be honest. "When I was little, my mother died," he began, the words coming with difficulty. "I was only 6 years old. My father was a busy man. He didn't know how to take care of a son on his own." Hannah watched him with full attention, her large brown eyes fixed on him. "Evelyn worked at our house back then. She was our housekeeper. After my mother was gone, she was the one who took care of me. She prepared my meals, checked my homework, listened to my stories." Richard paused, feeling the strangeness of saying these things out loud. He had never spoken about this to anyone. "She was like a mother to me," he continued. "The only person who really cared if I was sad or happy, scared or safe." "And your father?" Hannah asked. "Didn't he take care of you?" Richard let out a sigh. "My father believed that boys needed to be strong, that showing feelings was inappropriate. He provided everything I needed materially, the best clothes, the best toys, the best education. But he didn't know how to be present." Hannah nodded, as if she perfectly understood the concept of emotional absence, despite her young age. "That's why you were sad when you saw Grandma was sick," she concluded, with surprising insight. "Yes," Richard admitted. "And I felt guilty too. I should have looked for her after I grew up. I should have made sure she was okay." Hannah was silent for a moment, absorbing this information. Then, in a lower voice, almost a whisper, she shared her own story. "I never knew my dad," she said, looking at her own hands. "Grandma said he left before I was born." Richard's heart ached. Another similarity between them, paternal absence, though in different forms. "And my mom died when I was really little," Hannah continued. "Grandma says she got very sick, like my grandma is now. Except there was no one to help, no good hospital." Her voice was factual, without self-pity, recounting painful events as if she were talking about the weather. Richard wondered how many times she had rehearsed this story in her mind, trying to make sense of a world that had deprived her of so much so early. "Since then, it's just been me and Grandma," Hannah concluded. "She always took care of me, even when she had almost nothing. She says I'm her treasure." Richard swallowed hard, fighting the emotion rising in his throat. He imagined Evelyn, the same woman who had been so kind to him, raising a granddaughter alone, facing hardships he couldn't even fathom. Hannah looked him directly in the eyes, her head slightly tilted. "So she saved you too," she said simply. Those words struck Richard like lightning. It was true. Evelyn had saved him. Not just by taking care of his physical needs, but by offering the affection and security his father didn't know how to give. She had preserved something inside him during those vulnerable years, a capacity to feel that his father had unconsciously tried to crush. Richard felt something break inside him, a barrier he had built over decades. It was as if this child, with her simple observation, had found the one crack in his carefully constructed armor. And through that crack, long repressed memories and feelings began to flow. He remembered nights when he would wake up crying, calling for his mother, and it was Evelyn who would appear, turning on the lamp, sitting on the edge of the bed. "I'm here, little one," she would say, stroking his hair. "I'm here." He remembered the cookies she would bake on Sunday afternoons, filling the kitchen with a scent that, for a few hours, made the mansion feel like a home. He remembered her reading stories, inventing different voices for each character, making him laugh when he thought he would never be able to again. And he remembered, with painful clarity, the day his father announced he was going to boarding school. Evelyn's look, helpless, devastated, as she packed his small suitcase. "Be strong, Richard," she had said, secretly slipping her embroidered handkerchief between his folded shirts. "Always remember who you are." "You're crying," Hannah observed, bringing him back to the present. Richard touched his own face, surprised to feel the wetness. He hadn't cried since. He couldn't even remember when. "I guess I am," he admitted, with a trembling smile. Hannah, in a surprising gesture, reached out and touched his face, wiping away a tear with her small fingers. "Grandma says crying cleanses the soul," she said seriously, "like the rain cleans the city." Richard chuckled softly, amazed at the wisdom in those simple words. This child, who had faced more loss and hardship in her 5 years than many adults, could offer comfort with the naturalness of someone who intimately knows pain. He realized, then, that Hannah was doing for him what he was trying to do for her, creating a safe space where vulnerabilities could be exposed without judgment. And he understood that this child was bringing back parts of himself he thought were lost forever. The ability to feel emotion, to care deeply, to connect with another human being beyond a superficial level. He looked at the girl's serious face and noticed, for the first time, how pale she was. The soft, dark circles under her large eyes, the skin that seemed almost translucent in the morning light. She had spent an entire week confined in that hospital room, rarely leaving even to go to the cafeteria. "Hannah," he said softly, "I think we both need some fresh air. How about we take a walk today? You've been here for many days." The girl looked uncertainly at Evelyn, still asleep. "But what about Grandma?" "She's much better, and the nurses are always nearby. We can ask them to call us if she wakes up and misses you." Hannah hesitated, biting her lower lip. Richard could see the conflict on her face, the desire to go out, to see something beyond those white walls, fighting against the fear of leaving her grandmother alone. "We won't go far," he assured her. "There's a park right across from the hospital. We can be back in minutes if needed." After a moment of consideration, Hannah nodded. "Okay," Richard smiled, feeling a wave of relief and joy that surprised him with its intensity. He arranged for a nurse to keep a special eye on Evelyn and left his cell phone number for any eventuality. They went down in the elevator, Hannah holding his hand tightly. When they walked out the automatic doors of the hospital, the girl stopped for a moment, blinking against the natural sunlight. Richard realized it was probably the first time in a week she had felt the open air. The park was just a street away. It was a well-kept space, with winding paths, flower beds, and a small artificial lake where ducks swam lazily. Wooden benches were strategically placed under leafy trees that offered generous shade. Hannah walked slowly, looking at everything with curiosity. Her steps became lighter as they moved through the park, and Richard noticed how she breathed deeply, as if wanting to absorb as much oxygen as possible after days in the enclosed hospital environment. They stopped by a snack vendor. Richard bought ice cream for them both, chocolate for Hannah, vanilla for himself. They sat on a bench overlooking the lake. A few feet away, an elderly man was throwing breadcrumbs to the ducks, who approached in eager flocks. "Look at all the little birds," Hannah said, pointing to a group of sparrows hopping near their feet, hoping for some ice cream crumbs. "Do you want to feed them?" Richard asked. When she nodded, he bought a small bag of popcorn from a street vendor. Hannah took a few kernels and carefully threw them on the ground. The sparrows approached, cautious at first, then more confident, one bolder than the others, even landed briefly on the bench next to her before flying away. Hannah laughed, a clear, crystal sound that Richard was hearing for the first time, not the restrained chuckle or the shy smile that sometimes appeared, but a genuine, spontaneous laugh of pure childhood joy. The sound hit Richard in a way he hadn't expected. He felt a warmth spread through his chest, a sense of fullness he didn't know. Watching Hannah's profile, the chocolate ice cream lightly smudging her chin, her bright eyes following the birds' movements, the smile that completely transformed her serious face, he understood that what he felt was something very close to love. Not the romantic love he had experienced with women in his life, nor the filial love he had felt for his mother, of which he had only hazy memories. It was something different, a protective love, but also one full of admiration, a deep desire to see this little person happy, safe, fulfilled. To see her smile like this every day, not just in rare moments. It was a feeling he had never imagined he could have. Something he didn't know how to name or explain completely, but that he recognized as true and profound. As Hannah continued to feed the sparrows, the smile still lighting up her face, Richard made another silent promise. He would not only take care of her and Evelyn materially, not only provide what they needed, he would try somehow to repay what Evelyn had done for him years ago, to offer not just sustenance, but presence, not just objects, but affection. The morning sun shone on them, creating golden reflections on the lake's surface. Hannah finished her ice cream and wiped her hands on the napkin with meticulous care. Then she looked at Richard. "Can we go back now? I want to tell Grandma about the birds when she wakes up." "Of course," he replied, getting up. "We'll make a drawing of them for her." Hannah took his hand naturally, as if it were something they had always done. As they walked back to the hospital, Richard allowed himself to believe, for the first time in decades, that maybe there was a second chance for him. An opportunity to recover not only Evelyn, but also that part of himself he had lost along the way. The ability to care, to connect, to love. And it was all thanks to a 5-year-old girl and a cracked plate on a rainy afternoon. 2 weeks had passed since Evelyn's admission. The intensive antibiotic treatment had finally beaten the infection, and her condition was improving daily. The doctors were talking about a hospital discharge for the following week, provided there was adequate care at home. Richard had already arranged everything. A spacious apartment in a quiet neighborhood, not far from his own address. Comfortable furniture, adjustments to facilitate Evelyn's recovery, and a special room for Hannah, with shelves for books and a dedicated space for drawing. A private nurse would come daily at first, and he himself would be present whenever possible. On that Sunday afternoon, the hospital room had a different atmosphere. The curtains were open, letting in the golden light of dusk. Evelyn was sitting up in bed, propped against pillows, her grey hair combed back. She was still thin and frail, but her eyes had regained the sparkle Richard remembered from his childhood. Hannah had gone with one of the nurses to the hospital's internal garden to pick some flowers for the room. It was a new ritual she had established. Every afternoon, new flowers to liven up the room, as she said. Richard sat in the chair beside the bed, as he did every afternoon after leaving the office. He had drastically reduced his workload in recent weeks, delegating responsibilities as he had never done before. His directors were surprised, but adapting well to the new dynamic. "How was your day?" Evelyn asked, her voice now stronger than the whisper of the first few days. "Productive," Richard replied. "We closed the deal with the Asian investors." Evelyn smiled, a smile Richard was learning to recognize, gentle, but with a touch of irony. "I still find it strange to talk about your business," she commented. "In my memory, you're still that little boy who would sneak into the kitchen to steal cookies." Richard chuckled softly. It was strange for him too, this new closeness with the woman who had been so important in his childhood. It was as if they were trying to build a bridge over a 30-year chasm. "Hannah seems more cheerful today," he observed, changing the subject. "Yes," Evelyn agreed, her gaze softening at the mention of her granddaughter. "She was so excited about this apartment you mentioned. She spent the whole morning drawing what she thinks it will look like." A comfortable silence settled between them. Through the window, they could see the sun beginning to set, tinting the sky orange and pink. In the hallway, they could hear the usual hospital sounds, hurried footsteps, distant conversations, the occasional clinking of equipment. "Richard," Evelyn said finally, her voice taking on a more serious tone, "there's something we need to talk about before I leave here." He noticed the change in her expression, a subtle tension, a determination that wasn't there before. "Of course," he replied, leaning forward slightly. "Is there a problem with the discharge arrangements?" Evelyn shook her head. She reached out her hand, taking his in a gesture that surprised him. Her fingers were cold, but her grip was firm. "It's about Hannah," she began, looking directly into his eyes. "And about you." "About us." Richard felt a pang of apprehension. There was something in the way Evelyn looked at him that suggested what was coming next would change everything. "I'm listening," he said. Evelyn took a deep breath, like someone gathering courage to dive into unknown waters. "After your mother passed," she began, the words coming out slowly, measured. "Toyosi, your father and I had a relationship." Richard blinked, trying to process what he had just heard. His father and Evelyn, Alexander Bennett, the cold, distant man he knew, romantically involved with the housekeeper. It seemed impossible. "A relationship," he repeated, unsure if he had understood correctly. Evelyn nodded, her eyes never leaving his. "It started about a year after Eleanor's death. It was unexpected for both of us. I was there to take care of you, but gradually, Alexander and I grew closer. He was different when we were alone. less rigid, less controlled. Richard tried to imagine his father like that, vulnerable, human, and found he couldn't form the image in his mind. For almost 2 years, we had something that, to me, was genuine. Evelyn continued, her voice softer now, almost nostalgic. He talked about marriage, about us forming a real family, with you. What happened? Richard asked, still trying to assimilate this revelation about a man he thought he knew. The board of directors happened, Evelyn replied, a touch of bitterness in her voice. One of the board members found out about us. He made it clear to Alexander that a recently widowed CEO marrying the housekeeper would be a scandal the company couldn't afford. Richard felt a wave of anger. Typical of his father, putting the company, the public image, above everything, including personal happiness. That's when he sent me to boarding school, he concluded, the pieces falling into place in his mind. Yes, Evelyn confirmed. It was the solution he found. Send you away, send me away, cut the ties all at once. A lump formed in Richard's throat. So many lost years, so many possibilities destroyed by pride and appearances. I found out I was pregnant 2 weeks after I left the mansion, Evelyn continued, her voice now almost a whisper. Richard felt as if the floor had disappeared from under his feet. His heart raced, and for a moment, everything around him seemed distant, unreal. Pregnant, he repeated, the word sounding strange on his lips. My daughter, Lisa, was born 6 months later, Evelyn said, squeezing his hand harder. Your half-sister. Richard felt the world spin. A sister. He had a sister. His whole life believing he was an only child, and now he discovered he had shared this bond with someone. Lisa, he murmured, testing the name. My sister. Yes, Evelyn confirmed, and she was Hannah's mother. The impact of this second revelation was even greater. Richard felt as if he had been physically struck. The implications of that simple sentence exploded in his mind like fireworks. Hannah is, he began, unable to complete the sentence. Your niece, Evelyn confirmed. Hannah is your sister's daughter. She is your family, Richard, your own flesh and blood. Images from the past few days flashed through his mind in a whirlwind. Hannah drawing quietly, Hannah feeding the birds in the park, Hannah holding his hand as they walked. That instant connection he had felt, that strange familiarity. It all made sense now. Why didn't you tell me sooner? He asked, his voice trembling. I wanted to tell you so many times over the years, Evelyn replied, tears forming in her eyes. I wrote letters I never sent. I even went to your company building once, but I lost my nerve at the last moment. She paused, wiping a tear with her free hand. Then when you became so successful, so powerful, it felt like we belonged to different worlds. What right did I have to show up with these revelations after so long? Richard understood that feeling. He himself had built an isolated, distant life, protected by walls of money and power. He had become inaccessible, even to someone with a connection as deep as this. And Lisa, did she know about me? Evelyn nodded. I told her when she turned 16, she always wanted to meet you, but she respected my decision not to reach out. Lisa was so much like you in some ways, stubborn, determined. What happened to her? Richard asked, although he already suspected the answer. Pneumonia, like the one that almost took me, Evelyn replied, the pain evident in her voice. But she wasn't as lucky as I was. There was no Richard Bennett to call a private ambulance, to demand the best care. The weight of guilt fell on Richard like an avalanche. If he had looked for Evelyn sooner, if he had known about Lisa, maybe his sister would still be alive. Maybe Hannah wouldn't have lost her mother. I'm so sorry, he said, the words feeling terribly inadequate. I should have... No, Evelyn interrupted firmly. There's no blame here, Richard. Not yours, not mine. Just choices and consequences, some good, some painful. At that moment, the room door opened. Hannah entered, carrying a small bouquet of daisies and dandelions she had picked in the garden. She stopped upon seeing the serious expressions on the adults' faces. Did something happen? She asked, her small voice revealing concern. Richard and Evelyn exchanged a look, a silent question, an equally silent answer. Hannah, dear, Evelyn called, extending her hand to her granddaughter. Come here. Richard and I need to talk to you about something important. The girl approached cautiously, placing the flowers on the bed. Her large eyes went from one face to the other, trying to decipher what was happening. "It's okay," Richard assured her. "It's nothing bad." Hannah nodded, sitting on the edge of the bed. She hugged the sketchbook she had brought with her, as she always did when she was nervous. Evelyn looked at Richard, silently passing him the responsibility of starting this delicate conversation. He took a deep breath, searching for the right words simple enough for a 5-year-old to understand, but honest enough to honor the magnitude of the moment. "Hannah," he began gently, "do you remember when you told me you never knew your father, and that your mother went to heaven when you were a baby?" The girl nodded, her eyes fixed on him. "Well, we found out something very special today. Something about your mother, about me, and about you." Richard paused, watching Hannah's attentive expression. How to explain something so complex so simply? "Your mother, Lisa, was the daughter of Evelyn and my father," he continued. "That means Lisa was my sister. My half-sister, actually, because we had the same father but different mothers." Hannah frowned, processing this information. Richard could almost see the gears turning in her bright mind. "And if my mum was your sister," she said slowly, understanding dawning in her eyes, "then that means you're my uncle," Richard completed, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm your uncle, Hannah, for real. Not just someone who knew your grandmother, but your uncle by blood." The girl's eyes widened, and for a moment she was perfectly still. Then, slowly, tears began to form, sliding silently down her cheeks. "So, you're my real uncle?" she asked, her voice trembling. Richard nodded, unable to speak. The emotion had formed a lump in his throat that seemed impossible to untie. For a long moment, Hannah just looked at him, as if memorizing every detail of his face in this new light. Then, without warning, she dropped her sketchbook and threw herself into his arms, her small arms wrapped with surprising strength around his neck. "I always wanted to have family," she whispered against his shoulder, her voice choked with tears. "Besides Grandma." Richard hugged her back, feeling his own tears flow freely. In that moment, he understood what was important in life in a way that all his money and power had never taught him. He felt the weight of this small life in his arms, his niece, his family, and knew with absolute certainty that nothing in the world was more important than that hug. Over Hannah's shoulder, he saw Evelyn watching them, silent tears streaming down her wrinkled face. There was relief in her eyes, as if a weight she had carried for decades had finally been lifted. "Are we going to be a real family now?" Hannah asked, pulling back a little to look into his eyes. "Yes," Richard promised, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "We're going to be a family, the best family we can be." Hannah smiled, a radiant smile that lit up her whole face, and hugged him tightly again. Richard closed his eyes, absorbing the moment, engraving it in his memory. After everything, the loneliness, the losses, the wasted years, here he was, discovering the true meaning of family in the arms of a child he hadn't known existed just a few weeks ago. Life, in all its unpredictability, had given him a second chance. A chance to be not just the successful businessman Richard Bennett, but also Uncle Richard. A chance to build something more lasting than skyscrapers and fortunes, and he was determined not to waste this opportunity. The cab drove down a tree-lined street in a quiet suburb. Richard watched the elegant houses with their well-kept gardens from the window, while Hannah, sitting between him and Evelyn, practically vibrated with anticipation. "Are we almost there?" she asked for the third time in 5 minutes. "Almost," Richard replied, smiling. "Try 2 more blocks." Evelyn held her granddaughter's hand, her face still marked by the fatigue of her hospital stay, but with a serenity she hadn't shown in weeks. She had been discharged from the hospital 3 days earlier, but Richard had insisted they stay in a hotel suite until everything was ready at the new house. "You're going to like the place," he said to Hannah. "There's lots of room to play." The girl nodded, clutching her sketchbook to her chest. In the past few weeks, she had filled several pages with drawings of her dream house, always with a big garden, wide windows, and space for the 3 of them. The cab finally turned onto a quieter street and stopped in front of a wrought iron gate. Through the bars, one could see a stone driveway leading to a 2-story house with a brick facade and large windows. "We're here," Richard announced, paying the driver. Hannah pressed her face against the window, her eyes wide. Evelyn held her breath for a moment, clearly not expecting something so grand. When they got out of the car, the driver helped with the few bags they had. Most of Hannah and Evelyn's belongings had not been brought from the old house, as Richard had insisted on buying everything new. Only items of sentimental value were rescued from the small, leachy, damp home they were leaving behind. Richard opened the gate and held out his hand to Hannah. "Shall we go see our home?" The girl took his hand but hesitated, looking back to make sure Evelyn was following. Her grandmother walked slowly, still recovering, but with an encouraging smile. "It's okay, dear. Go on ahead with your uncle." That word, uncling, still sounded strange and wonderful to Richard's ears. In the 2 weeks since the revelation, he was getting used to his new identity. Not just a successful businessman, but an uncle, a protector, someone with responsibilities that went far beyond contracts and negotiations. They walked down the polished stone driveway, lined with beds of various flowers, daisies, petunias, gerberas, an explosion of color under the morning sun. Hannah let go of Richard's hand and ran ahead, stopping to examine each flower, each bush, as if she couldn't believe so much beauty. The house was spacious, but not ostentatious. Richard had carefully chosen something that would be comfortable without being intimidating. The classic architecture with modern touches created a welcoming atmosphere, far from the coldness of his own penthouse downtown. "The garden continues in the back," he explained, as they reached the front door. "There are fruit trees and room to play." Before he could open the door, Hannah had already run down the side path leading to the back of the house. Richard and Evelyn followed at a slower pace. "Richard," Evelyn said, her voice choked with emotion, "this is too much. We don't need—" "Please," he interrupted gently, "let me do this. For you. For me. For the family we could have been all these years." Evelyn nodded, unable to argue against the genuine emotion in his voice. When they reached the backyard, they found Hannah running across the green lawn. The garden was large, with leafy trees providing generous shade. A small peach tree, an apple tree, and even a cherry tree were strategically placed. In the back, an old oak tree supported a simple swing made of rope and wood. "Look, Grandma," Hannah shouted, running from one side to the other. "There's a swing and flowers everywhere." Her face, usually serious, was transformed by joy. Richard's heart ached seeing her like this, free, carefree, acting like the child she was, without the weight of the responsibilities she had carried for so long. Evelyn watched her granddaughter with eyes shining with unshed tears. Her hand found Richard's and squeezed it in a silent thank you. "Shall we see the inside?" he suggested after a few minutes. Hannah ran back to them, her cheeks flushed from the exercise, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "There's more," Richard laughed, a sound that was becoming more and more frequent in his life. Much more. They entered through the back door, which led to a large, bright kitchen. Everything was new, from the light wood cabinets to the modern appliances. In the center, a large solid wood table with 8 chairs invited family meals. "The fridge is already stocked," Richard commented. "And I've hired a cook who will come 3 times a week until Evelyn is fully recovered." Hannah explored every corner, opening cabinets, admiring the marble countertop. Her eyes widened when she saw the large refrigerator, so different from the small, noisy one they used to have. "There's every kind of juice in here," she exclaimed after opening the door. From the kitchen, they moved into the living room, with comfortable sofas, a discreet fireplace, and a built-in bookshelf filled with books. Hannah ran to it, examining the titles with curiosity. "I chose some children's books," Richard explained. "Say, but we can buy more, whatever kind you like." They continued the tour of the first floor, a formal dining room, a small office, and even a game room with a ping-pong table and a large television. "Now, let's see the second floor," Richard suggested, pointing to the wooden staircase that curved elegantly upwards. On the upper floor, the wide hallway led to 4 spacious bedrooms. Richard opened the first door on the right. "This is your room, Evelyn." It was an elegant room, with a queen-sized bed, dark wood furniture, and a comfortable armchair by the window that offered a view of the garden. The colors were soft, shades of blue and green that conveyed tranquility. A side door led to a private bathroom, adapted with safety bars and a shower seat. Considering her recovery, Evelyn entered hesitantly, touching the embroidered bedspread as if she couldn't believe it was real. "It's beautiful, Richard." "Thank you." Hannah tugged at his hand, eager to see the rest of the house. "Hold on," he laughed. "I saved the best for last." They walked to the end of the hall, where Richard stopped in front of a door painted a soft yellow. There was a small wooden plaque hanging on it, with the name Hannah carved in cursive letters. "This is your space," he said, opening the door with a theatrical flourish. The room was a childhood dream come true. The walls were a soft shade of seafoam green, with white clouds painted near the ceiling. A bed shaped like a boat occupied the center, covered with a colorful quilt with rainbow patterns. Shelves filled with children's books ran along one wall, while the other housed a desk with art supplies. Pencils, paints, brushes, modeling clay, all organized in colorful boxes. A toy chest overflowed with teddy bears, dolls, building blocks, and educational games. In the corner, by the window overlooking the garden, was a small reading armchair and a lamp shaped like a moon. Hannah stood at the doorway, as if afraid to enter and discover it was all just a dream. Her eyes scanned every detail, trying to take it all in at once. Is it all mine?" she finally asked, her voice almost inaudible. "All yours," Richard confirmed. "You can change anything you don't like." The girl took a hesitant step inside, then another. She touched the colorful quilt, examined the books, opened the toy chest. When she reached the desk, her fingers slid over the colored pencils, dozens of them, organized by shade, far more than the set he had given her in the hospital. "I've never had my own room," she said. So quietly Richard barely heard. Evelyn, standing beside him at the door, discreetly wiped away a tear. Hannah continued to explore, opening drawers, trying out the armchair, testing the softness of the bed. Each discovery brought a new sparkle to her eyes. When they finished the house tour, they returned downstairs. In the entrance hall, Richard took something from his pocket, a keychain with 3 golden keys. "I almost forgot the most important part," he said, holding the keychain out to Evelyn. "The keys to the house." Evelyn looked at the keys, then at Richard, her eyes filled with tears again. "From now on, you won't lack for anything," he promised, placing the keys in her hand and gently closing her fingers around them. Evelyn couldn't reply. Tears now flowed freely down her wrinkled face, not tears of sadness, but of relief, gratitude, hope. A lifetime of struggles, of hardship, of sacrifices for her daughter and then her granddaughter, culminating in this moment of finally achieved security. Hannah approached, hugging her grandmother's waist. Evelyn put an arm around her granddaughter's shoulders, while with the other hand she held tightly to the keys, tangible symbols of a new beginning. Richard watched them both, feeling strangely complete. After decades of building a financial empire, he realized that only now was he building something that truly mattered. A home. Not just a house with walls and a roof, but a place of belonging, of connection, of family. The afternoon sun streamed through the wide windows, creating golden pools on the wooden floor. In the garden, birds sang among the trees, and within these walls, 3 people whom fate had separated and reunited were finally beginning the journey to become a family. The golden light of dawn streamed through the curtains of Hannah's room, creating soft patterns on the wooden floor. It had been 3 weeks since they moved into the new house, enough time for Evelyn to regain much of her strength and for Hannah to get used to the idea of having a real home. Richard had spent these weeks reorganizing his life. He delegated responsibilities, reduced his working hours, and Marviers, for the first time in years, started working remotely a few days a week. The meetings that once seemed urgent and unavoidable now had to adjust to his new priority, being present in the life of his newfound family. On that special morning, Richard arrived early, carrying a large box wrapped in colorful paper. He found Evelyn in the kitchen making pancakes. Her health was improving every day, and she insisted on resuming some of her normal activities. "Good morning," he greeted, placing the box on the table. "Is Hannah awake yet?" "She's just finishing getting ready," Evelyn replied, smiling. Or she woke up before sunrise. She was so anxious. Richard nodded, understanding the girl's excitement. After interviews and tests, Hannah had been accepted into St. Mary's School, one of the best institutions in the city. Although the school year was already underway, the headmistress was impressed with the girl's intelligence and agreed to admit her immediately. Light footsteps on the stairs announced Hannah's arrival. She entered the kitchen wearing a simple dress, her hair carefully combed. Her eyes immediately noticed the colorful box. "Good morning, Uncle Richard," she said, the formality she still couldn't completely shake. "Good morning, little one," he replied, gesturing to the box. "I brought you something." Hannah approached cautiously. Despite 3 weeks in the new house, she was still surprised by every gift, every kindness, as if she couldn't believe her life had changed so much. "You can open it," Richard encouraged. Carefully, she unwrapped the gift, revealing the contents of the box. A new, perfectly folded school uniform, a navy blue pleated skirt, a white shirt, a sweater with the school crest embroidered on it, white socks. Beside it, a pair of shiny black shoes and leaning against the side, a blue backpack with yellow details. Hannah touched the uniform with reverence, her fingers sliding over the new fabric. "It's so beautiful," she murmured. "Ready for your first day of school?" Richard asked, watching the emotion on her face. Hannah looked up, a genuine smile lighting up her face. "Yes, Uncle," she replied, her voice overflowing with contained emotion. After breakfast, Richard waited patiently while Hannah got dressed in her new uniform. When she came downstairs, she looked like a different person, no longer the girl in worn-out clothes he had found on that rainy day, but a confident student, ready to embrace all the opportunities that education could offer. Evelyn waited at the door, her eyes shining with pride and emotion. "You look beautiful, my love," she said, adjusting the collar of Hannah's shirt. "Your mother would be so proud." Hannah hugged her grandmother tightly, then took the backpack Richard was holding. "Shall we go?" she asked, anxiety showing in her voice. The drive to school was quiet, each lost in their own thoughts. Richard, driving his own car instead of the chauffeured limousine he normally used, occasionally glanced in the rearview mirror, watching Hannah in the back seat. She looked out the window, her wide eyes taking in every detail of the route. St. Mary's School occupied a historic building surrounded by century-old trees. Its central courtyard, visible through the ornate iron gates, was already filled with children in uniforms identical to Hannah's, some playing, others talking in small groups. Richard parked and walked around the car to open the door for Hannah. She got out slowly, clutching her backpack to her chest, her eyes fixed on the school gate. "Are you nervous?" he asked gently. "A little," Hannah admitted. "What if the other kids don't like me?" Richard knelt to be at her eye level, ignoring the fact that his Italian suit would be ruined at the knees. "They're going to love you," he assured her, "because you're smart, kind, and special. But even if it takes a little while to make friends, remember, you're not alone. Your grandmother and I will be waiting for you at the end of the day." Hannah nodded, seeming a little more confident. Together, they walked to the gate, where the headmistress was waiting for them with a welcoming smile. "Welcome to St. Mary's, Hannah," she said, extending her hand. "So let's introduce you to your teacher and your new classmates." Hannah hesitated for a moment, looking at Richard. He knelt again, adjusting the backpack on her shoulders and tucking a stray strand of hair back into her careful hairdo. "I will always be here," he whispered, just for her to hear. "Whenever you need me, for whatever you need." One last hug, quick but firm, and Hannah turned, taking the headmistress's hand. As she walked through the school gates, her back was straight, her steps firm. At the entrance to the main building, she looked back one last time and waved, a confident smile on her face, before disappearing through the doors. Richard remained there, watching the spot where she had been, feeling a mixture of pride and melancholy he had never experienced before. So this was how parents felt on their children's first day of school. As he walked back to the car, he thought about the extraordinary journey that had brought them here. From a chance encounter on a rainy day to a family united by blood and love, in that house with the garden, they were becoming a family, full of love, affection, and the certainty that no success can replace being together. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't